Chair, President, thank you very, very much indeed for welcoming me today, and thanks very much for the privilege of addressing the conference, because there are many things that we can discuss together and achieve together, but I'm really pleased that you decided to re-affiliate to the Labour Party. Can I say on behalf of the party, welcome back, and I'm delighted you're part of the party and delighted to look forward to FBU resolutions coming up to annual conference and the huge contribution this union has always made, not just on behalf of the industry, obviously, but also on behalf of so many international issues over many years. All General Secretaries have been great supporters of the party in its international work. So thank you very much, all of you, for that re-affiliation. Thanks also to Matt as General Secretary for 11 years and Andy Dark, the Assistant, and all the reps in the union, many of whom I've met over many years, both in my own constituency and in travelling around the country. And I've always made sure that I have the closest possible relationship with this union, and it's been great working with Matt and Andy and so many others on all the issues that affect the fire service, but also the way in which you always reach out to other public service unions in exactly the same way. I also want to thank you for the support you gave to our campaign, and I stress it's our campaign on the leadership of the Labour Party last summer, because we decided to go into that campaign because we wanted a different economic strategy, and I'll come back to that in a moment, and we wanted our party to be more open, more democratic, where policies come upwards rather than ascent downwards, and that every member's abilities, inspiration, imagination can be brought to bear as we develop the policies of our movement. It's only when everybody is involved in developing the policies of our movement that we become really strong and we can really take on and defeat not just the Tories, but the ideology behind the Tories and what they're doing to this country. And I'm full of admiration for the FBU fire tender, which seems to travel around the country at enormous speed, not. And wherever it arrives, it seems to get there just in time to be the platform for various rallies. And I'm really grateful to you for that. And I've now been given a cap, so I can wear the cap whenever I'm on top of the fire tender again. Is that okay? The most dramatic one was when we had a rally at the Camden Town Hall, or the Camden Centre, towards the end of the leadership campaign, when it was so full. We had 5 overflow meetings, and we'd run out of rooms to have overflow meetings in, and so the fire tender came into its own, and the last overflow of another 500 people assembled around the fire tender, and we were able to give that speech there. The trade unions founded the Labour Party. The Labour Party has maintained its existence because of trade unions, and I have spent my life as a trade unionist, and I will die as a trade unionist, because I'm proud to be a member of a trade union. I'm proud to call myself a trade unionist. To me, it's not an embarrassment that our party has trade union affiliates. It's something I'm very proud of, because that is the nature of what the Labour Party has to be about. And in opposition, we're obviously taking the fight to the Tories. We have achieved some victories in Parliament over the last few months, and in achieving those victories, we obviously give people confidence. We still have a very long way to go. But take a couple, for example. The trade union bill. It is an anti-trade union bill. It is designed to silence trade unions. We already have some of the most restrictive trade union laws in Europe, and just before the last election, they managed to pass into law the very ill-named Trade Union Transparency and Lobbying Bill. It was the very opposite of transparency. It was very anti-trade union, and it was very anti any civil society NGO that wanted to make its voice felt in the run-up to a general election, but it gave freedom of lobbying to corporations, hedge funds, and all the wealthiest within our society. I want to be heading that Labour government in 2020. It introduces new positive rights at work, positive rights to join a trade union, and repeals the anti-trade union legislation that we've got. This is a very important step forward we're making when we're setting up Workplace 2020 in the near future, which will be a development of all our workplace policies and rights at work, and I hope and I'm sure the union will want to take part in that. I think we have to speak up for the principle of trade unions and what they've achieved within our society. We have won some concessions out of the bill on electronic balloting, on facility time, on check-off, and to some extent on union political funds. But to those people that say trade unions are a problem in our society, I quite simply say this. Where there is a strong trade union, you actually usually get better management. You normally get better pay, you normally have better conditions, you normally have people staying on in that place or that enterprise much longer because they are better run places. Exploitation leads to discrimination, fewer forms of redress, worse working conditions, and often in the private sector, much lower levels of productivity. And a strong union like yours, like the FBU, obviously defends workers' rights, but you're also defending the public services that everybody relies on. And it's very interesting that whenever issues of public service cuts come up, and I've been at numerous meetings over many years on issues of public spending, going back all of my political life, the FBU is a very popular union. The fire service is a very popular service because everyone recognises how important that service is and how much they rely on it. And I just say to those people that seem to think there's something very clever in escaping and avoiding tax and putting your savings into tax havens around the world, one day your house might catch fire. One day you might need a public service to save your building, save your property, or even save your life. It's the rest of us who've paid our taxes that have made sure that service is there. Pay your taxes and be moral about it. And so my involvement in the union, because of my great age, goes back to 1977 when I joined picket lines then, and again in 2002, 2003 when the coalition government came after your pensions. Fundamentally, our election campaign for the leadership of the party was about the economy and was about economic choices that are made. I think that offering austerity light in the 2015 election meant there wasn't sufficient choice put before the people of this country on the direction in which they wanted to go. And so I was very clear that the first duty I had to do was to try and change the economic policy and direction of the party, which is why the first appointment I made was of John McDonnell as Shadow Chancellor of the Exchequer. Because John has an enormous record in work with your union and indeed all the other unions. He was an officer of the FBU group in Parliament, but also he is very clear, and he's put this very clearly so many times. The austerity we're going through, the rolling back of the state we're now going through in Britain is a political choice, not an economic necessity. That message we have to get across very clearly. And your union, your industry and your members have been treated very badly. They've tried to change terms and conditions, steal from the pension scheme, and it's an absolutely outrageous way to treat firefighters. The cuts in the fire service are wrong and unnecessary, and we're now seeing, for the first time I can remember, an increase in fire deaths due to the longest response times in 20 years. I'm not blaming any firefighter for that. I'm not blaming anyone in the industry for that. I'm blaming a government that has so underfunded our service that so many fire stations have been closed. Therefore, it's obviously more difficult to deal with the service that's necessary. I think the work of the fire service in making all of our homes and buildings much safer is incredible. I think the responsibility and bravery of the members is absolutely incredible. But they keep on making these choices to close fire stations, and I've been with you on challenging all of those for a very long time. This government is making the wrong economic choices in cutting vital public services and in not investing sufficiently in what we need to do in this country. We need investment in new rail links, we need a transition towards a carbon-free economy, and crucially, and this is where the virtuous circle of public investment comes round, we need far greater investment in housing to deal with the housing crisis that every one of you faces in some way or the other, either yourselves or your family. And in the case of expensive big cities, I talk to firefighters in my own constituency. Hardly any of them can afford to live anywhere near the fire stations in London. Many commute very long distances in order to provide the service that we all need. There has to be investment in housing, council housing with lifetime tenancies, reasonable levels of rent and real security, so our children can grow up not with the insecurity of the private rented sector and possibly having to move house every 6 months, instead knowing they've got a home, they can call their own, they can enjoy their childhood, do well at school as a result of it. The lack of investment in housing is something that's so damaging to every working class community and every family in this country. I want to reverse that. I want to invest in housing. That in turn creates jobs down the supply chain. What the Tories are doing is forcing councils to sell off their best properties, allowing the building of speculative luxury homes that are then kept empty as a process of land banking or sold off plan, whilst there are more and more people sleeping on the streets and more people living in grossly overcrowded accommodation. It doesn't have to be like that. It could be very different if instead of worshipping the idea of profit for the few, we instead embrace the idea of provision for the many and for all. That surely is what a good, caring society is about. In our fire service, there are many issues that are coming up. I want to thank Lynn Brown, our Shadow Minister responsible for fire service. It wasn't her choice, it wasn't my choice that it be moved to the Home Office, and I believe that it's very important that we defend the fire service, and in the Police and Crime Commissioner elections I made it very clear to all of our Police and Crime Commissioner candidates that I wanted to be very careful to make sure the fire service wasn't cut in order to put money into the police service or vice versa. There needs to be more, not less investment in the fire service, and we've got to keep absolutely on the line on that one. You as firefighters put your lives on the line all the time, and I pay tribute to those that have died as a result of trying to save lives. Over the last few months, we've had serious flooding within this country. I've met many people working in the fire service who did incredible work in dealing with the floods, in dealing with the security of people in them and saving lives. I also met many others that volunteered to help and other services that came to the rescue. But two things have to change. One is to ensure there is sufficient provision by the fire service in order to meet the emergencies, and they're becoming more frequent because climate change does affect rainfall, does affect flooding, and the lack of investment in flood protection is an issue. But we also need, as a society, to recognise that the work of the fire service is, of course, saving from fire, is, of course, preventing fire. That is very well done. But the other side of it is we need a statutory obligation on flooding and flood protection in order to ensure that the funding goes with it and the equipment goes with it to make sure you're there and able to deal with the next crisis. I was alarmed at the stretch that had been reached during the floods last year in Cumbria, in Lancashire and in Yorkshire. Imagine if at the same time the same level of flooding as happened in previous years had happened in the Thames Valley and in Somerset as well. Would the services have been able to cope with 4 or 5 major floods across the country? You know the answer better than I do. The way we protect our society isn't relying on the goodwill of volunteers, valuable as that is. The way we protect our society is funding our emergency services to cope with the worst disasters, investing in flood protection, investing in upstream river management in order to protect all our towns and cities. And I've always found it very valuable talking to firefighters on the issues surrounding floods and flood protection. And I want to use this opportunity to say a huge thank you on behalf of thousands of people around this country to the work your members did in saving life during the floods. There are huge issues facing us at the present time, and one of those is, of course, how we defend and extend rights at work, how we defend and extend the working time directive that we achieved in this country through the European Union, and how we ensure we protect our anti-discrimination legislation. And in dealing with the issue of Europe, I want to put it this way, that I've come to the conclusion that we should vote to remain, not because I love the European Union or love all its institutions, but because I want to protect the working condition advances that we have made. I want to oppose the transatlantic trade and investment partnership, which will essentially give investors protection at the expense of the rest of us. And I want to work with trade unions and socialist parties all across Europe, as I've been doing ever since I became the leader of this party. Because I want us to work with people across national borders, particularly those in the private sector where they're often facing the same employer, in order to strengthen workers' rights across Europe. Like you, I'm alarmed at the rise of the far right in this country and across Europe. The rise of the far right, exploiting people who are in a place of great danger, refugees fleeing from war, and those that are trying to eke out an existence in order to make a contribution to our society. And one victory we have managed to achieve in the past couple of weeks is forcing and indeed shaming the government into supporting Alf Dubb's amendment to provide a place of safety and sanctuary to 3,000 unaccompanied child refugees currently trying to survive in very dangerous refugee camps all over this continent. We deal with the problem of refugees and refugee flows by a political solution to the problem at source in Libya and Syria. We also deal with the problem by reaching out the hand of humanity to people rather than dealing with them with barbed wire and tear gas. They are human beings like you and me trying to survive in a very cruel and very dangerous world. We bring about a safer and better world by promoting human rights, democracy, justice and humanity, not necessarily by going to war and making the situation worse in place after place around the world. But we also have to deal with some of the economic issues. This week at Prime Minister's Question Time, I asked Cameron several times the issue of working conditions of companies that cynically exploit workers across Europe, where one enterprise moves wholesale its workforce from one country to another in order to pay them a lower rate of pay, which may be the one that pertains in the first country, in order to lay off people in the second country, thus reducing the living standards and wages of those staff and undermining pay and working conditions. There is a proposal going before the EU Commission, which so far has been blocked by British Tories and the British government, which would end this scandalous practice of exploiting workers by moving them from one place to another. Likewise, the country-by-country reporting that we've demanded on tax payments, likewise the demands that we're making on closing down the British-administered tax havens around the world. The point I made at the beginning about people paying taxes in order to get public services applies to every other aspect of it. It's simply not right that the industrial scale of tax evasion continues. Even the Treasury admits that £34 billion a year is uncollected in tax. That £34 billion would help fund the health service, would help fund our education service, would help fund all of our public services. It's simply not right, the levels of tax evasion that go on, and I'm grateful to those journalists that managed to expose the Panama Papers and the systematic way that all of our public services are being undermined by these people. I want a government that chases down tax evasion, not dreams up ways to promote tax avoidance. We've had elections last week, and I want to congratulate Sadiq Khan on being elected Mayor of London, Marvin Rees being elected Mayor of Bristol, and the many other Police and Crime Commissioner and local authorities that Labour managed to either retain control of or gain control of in the case of Lancaster, which is very nearby. Those councils are in a difficult situation because of the way in which there is systematic underfunding by this central government of their services. But they're also in a position to expose what this government is doing, try to build the houses that we need, and try to ensure that we have the public services that we need. We also won both parliamentary by-elections in Ogmore and Sheffield Brightside, and I was really pleased to welcome Chris Elmore and Jill Furness to Parliament this week. And it was wonderful that Jill's first question was about Hillsborough, and I pay tribute to all those that worked so hard for so long in order to bring justice to the Hillsborough families and get the decision that was the right one that finally came out of the inquest. That shows what happens when working class communities come together to demand justice. It's a long, hard road, but that road must now also include an opening up of an inquiry into what happened in Orgreave, as Jill demanded, and also the question of the Shrewsbury 24 and the systematic blacklisting of trade union activists within the building industry. We're not done yet on this, because I want to chase down these levels of injustice and corruption of our justice system that has happened, has been exposed by those inquiries. And I thank your union for the support that it's given to those families that have been trying to deal with the horror of knowing, in the case of Hillsborough, that their loved ones had died and they were being quite falsely blamed for something that they absolutely did not do. Justice is something that is only won by ordinary people coming together. It's only defended by ordinary people and their trade unions coming together to defend it and expose it when injustice happens. So I think we should all join together and congratulate the Hillsborough families for what they've achieved for all of us. When we work together as a society, we achieve a great deal. It was the trade unions that founded the Labour Party. It was trade union pressure in the Labour Party that helped to bring about the welfare state, helped to bring about the National Health Service, and helped to bring about the high provision of council housing that was made, particularly by post-war Labour government. It was that pressure that also brought about the Equal Pay Act, that also brought about the Health and Safety at Work Act, that also brought about the Human Rights Act and the Equalities Act. The Tories don't understand any of that. What they want to do is roll back the state. What they want to do is roll back the provision of public services and so underfund the National Health Service that instead of being the service of first port of call, it becomes a service of last resort at the same time as there's a burgeoning private medical service. I absolutely defend the National Health Service. I support the junior doctors in their defence of the National Health Service. But I want to go a stage further, not just in the funding of the health service, but also in the good provision of mental health services all across the country, which is why I wanted to appoint somebody at cabinet level to deal with the mental health issue in this country, to end the stigma, end the trauma, and so that people going through a mental health crisis don't do so alone and isolated, but do so with the understanding of the rest of the community. I understand to some extent, because I've not been through it myself, that's why I say some extent, the trauma that your members face when they've had to pull bodies out of fires, killed children out of homes, and so on. All the horrors that go with that, and the support that they need. It's those kind of traumas that there has to be a mental health service to deal with, just as much as there has to be a mental health service to deal with those that are going through all kinds of other traumas brought about the stresses of our society. We can be big enough, strong enough, and kind enough as a society to reach out to everybody, not just those that can afford private treatment. That is the principle of our National Health Service. The Tories next week will produce a Queen's Speech for the new session of Parliament. I obviously do not know what the contents of it are going to be. But I do know our position will be to defend the Human Rights Act if it's at risk, to defend the Equalities Act if it's at risk, but also to demand sufficient funding for our public services, but also to demand sufficient investment in our economy so that we do have a growing economy, so that young people coming out of college and university can look forward to a decent future for themselves. Because I'm fed up with being told by many very expert people, apparently, that the next generation is going to be worse off than this one, and the one after that's going to be even worse off than that one. Does that have to be the case? Does that have to be the case at all? Or is it that the political movements that are happening in this country, happening in Europe, happening in the USA, are actually challenging an economic story which says the only way forward is to roll back the state, promote the private sector, promote private enterprise, and promote individual wealth at the expense of collective good? Our movement is about the collective good, is about reaching out to everybody. Our party has changed quite a lot. Our party is now bigger in membership and activity than it's ever been, particularly bigger amongst young members of the party. These are exciting times that we can bring about real change for the benefit of everybody in our society, and show that those that founded our movement with all their bravery and intelligence 100 years ago are not forgotten. We learn those lessons to go forward into the 21st century, the century of high technology, where we're able to ensure that wealth that's created is properly shared and doesn't just become a vehicle for increasing inequality and increasing wealth within our society. That's what our movement is about. That's what our party is about. And I'm delighted that we're able to work together to achieve the policies we need for the future, to bring about the future that will actually benefit all those that are suffering at the present time. Thank you very much for inviting me here today.